The arrogant CEO thought he was firing a helpless admin to cover up his $4 million embezzlement. He didn't know his secret partner in this hostile takeover was my own estranged stepson. I gripped my steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, suffocating on my own family's betrayal. But to understand how I trapped them, I need to take you back to the boardroom. Topic Chapter 1. I watched the man who was stealing my company hand out fraudulent financial reports. Then he snapped his fingers at me. He called me the coffee girl. He had no idea I owned the building. My name is Layla Sterling. I am 58 years old, and I am the majority shareholder of Aegis Biometrics. But to Julian Mercer, our newly hired CEO, I was just the aging admin. We were in the main glass boardroom in downtown Atlanta. It was 9:15 on the Tuesday morning. The air conditioning was running too high. The room smelled like expensive cedar cologne and cheap corporate anxiety. Julian was sitting at the head of the long glass table. He was handing out the Q3 financial packets to the board members. Beautiful, glossy packets, printed on heavy cardstock. They showed a $1.2 million profit for the quarter. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was clapping him on the back. I stood quietly in the corner by the espresso machine. I was wearing a plain gray cardigan, invisible, just the way I designed it. I remember the day I handed him the CEO title. It was 2021. I sat in my old corner office. The leather chair felt heavy that day. I was signing a thick stack of transition documents. I wanted to step back. I wanted to focus on archival logistics in the shadows. Julian had smiled at me across the mahogany desk. It was a tight, hungry smile, a bit too eager. I should have recognized the greed in his eyes back then. But arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. Back in the boardroom, Julian turned his chair toward me. The leather squeaked against the glass table. He held out his empty ceramic mug. He didn't make eye contact. He just stared at his phone and snapped his fingers. Make sure the oat milk isn't expired this time, sweetheart. The room went dead silent. You could hear the low hum of the ceiling projector. A few board members shifted uncomfortably in their expensive chairs. One of them cleared his throat. No one corrected Julian. No one defended the aging admin. An icy, calculated rage washed over my chest. My hands tightened around the silver coffee carafe. The metal was burning hot against my skin. I could feel my pulse throbbing in my throat. I took a slow, deep breath. I walked over to the head of the table. My flats made no sound on the carpet. I reached out to collect his empty mug. That was when I saw it. The boardroom table is made of highly polished black glass. Under the fluorescent lights, it acts almost like a mirror. Julian's laptop was open in front of him. The screen was facing away from the board, but it was reflecting perfectly off the black glass right below my hand. The paper trail never lies. I looked down at the glowing reflection. It was an unredacted Q3 loss projection. The numbers on his private screen were glowing in bright, undeniable red. A $4 million deficit. I froze. My breath hitched in my chest. I slowly glanced at the printed packet sitting next to his keyboard. 1.2 million in profit. The screen reflection showed negative 4 million. Why was Julian presenting fake profit numbers to the board? Where did $5.2 million go? My mind started racing through the possibilities. Embezzlement, phantom vendors, a setup for a hostile takeover. He was bleeding my life's work dry right in front of me. He thought he was a genius. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I was just a tired old woman fetching his breakfast. I picked up his ceramic mug. The porcelain was still warm against my palm. I looked at the back of his perfectly tailored suit jacket. I didn't throw the hot coffee in his arrogant face. I just smiled, walked back to my basement office, and logged into the master admin terminal he didn't know existed. Topic Chapter 2. The cursor blinked against the black screen of my basement terminal. $5.2 million gone. Just vanished into the corporate ether. I sat back in my worn leather chair. The basement air conditioning hummed above me. I needed to understand exactly how Julian pulled this off. I turned to the heavy steel fireproof safe behind my desk. I spun the cold metal dial. 34. Right to 12. Left to 51. The heavy door clicked open. It smelled like old paper and stale air. I pulled out a thick manila folder. The edges were frayed from years of hiding. Inside were the Caspian Group blind trust formation papers. The income signature line was faded from 1998, but the legal weight was absolute. Layla Sterling, sole beneficiary. absolute voting proxy of 51% of age's biometrics. My late husband built this company from a garage. When he passed, the corporate vultures started circling. I created the blind trust to protect his legacy. I became a ghost in my own house. I own the building. I own the company. But Julian Mercer doesn't know that. To our arrogant CEO, I am just Layla, the legacy hire from the 90s, the older woman who manages the physical archives, the invisible admin who pours his espresso. I remembered an email Julian sent last Thursday. I pulled it up on my secondary monitor. He mandated that all legacy server hardware be physically destroyed. By the end of the month, he wanted the old hard drive shredded and melted down. He called it a routine security protocol. You don't burn the house down unless you're hiding a body. Now I knew it was a cover-up. I waited until the building completely emptied out. The night shift security guard always takes his break at 10. At 10:14 p.m., I walked down the basement archives corridor. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead with a low buzz. The air down here always smells like floor wax and old cardboard. I stopped at an unmarked gray door at the end of the hall. It isn't on any official floor plan. I pulled my master keycard from my lanyard. I swiped it against the hidden reader. The heavy deadbolt clacked open with a sharp thud. I stepped into the hidden server room. The chill instantly hit my face. The server fans roared like a jet engine. Rows of modern blinking racks lined the right wall, but the left wall held my late husband's legacy, the original mainframe. I walked over and ran my fingers over the cold metal casing. I traced the thick black physical cables. They ran from the modern servers straight into my hidden system. I felt a surge of nostalgic pride. It was immediately swallowed by deep suspicion. I pulled up a rolling stool and sat at the console. I cracked my knuckles. It was time to treat Julian's discrepancy like a crime scene. The paper trail never lies, especially the digital ones. I bypassed his executive firewall. It took me exactly 4 keystrokes. Julian uses his birth year as his admin password. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. I opened the unredacted general ledger for Q3. The screen filled with scrolling green text. I watched the raw data fly by. My eyes tracked the specific routing codes. 4 million in deficits. 1.2 million in fabricated profits. Where did the real money go? I filtered the search by outbound wire transfers. I cross-referenced the payments against our approved vendor list. I set the parameter for amounts over $50,000. My coffee was completely cold on the desk beside me. I didn't care. I leaned closer to the monitor. The harsh glow reflected off my glasses. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. My hands were perfectly steady on the keyboard. I was hunting. A pattern started to emerge from the data. Shell companies. Phantom vendors billing for biometrics consulting. All registered in Delaware. Every phantom vendor had a different corporate name. Apex Solutions. Horizon Biometrics. Vanguard Security. But whoever set them up got lazy. I checked the IP addresses used to register their offshore payment portals. They didn't trace back to Delaware. They didn't trace back to a legitimate consulting firm. They all pointed back to a residential router, a router located right here in Atlanta. Julian thought he controlled the nervous system of my company. He didn't realize I was the spine. And by 2 a.m., I found his first fatal mistake. Top it chapter 3. It was 2:14 a.m. on Wednesday. My eyes were burning from the harsh blue glow of the master terminal. I had the IP address, but tracing the actual money required bypassing Julian's encrypted firewall. I needed a ghost. I needed Marcus Adeyemi. Marcus was our senior forensic IT specialist, until Julian demoted him to help desk support 3 months ago. Julian hated Marcus because Marcus actually read the security logs. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. At 7:30 a.m., I walked up to the third floor bullpen. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, giving me a mild headache. Marcus was slumped in a cheap mesh chair. He was staring blankly at a frozen ticketing screen. I dropped a thick manila folder onto his keyboard. I told him I needed him in the basement archives. He didn't even look up. He said, "Submit a ticket, Layla. I'm backed up." I leaned in close and lowered my voice. I said, "This isn't a printer jam, Marcus." I told him it was a $5.2 million network breach. That got his attention. His hand froze on the mouse. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide. 10 minutes later, I locked the heavy steel door of the hidden server room behind us. The air conditioning hummed loudly. It was freezing cold down here. Marcus dropped his heavy canvas backpack onto the concrete floor. He stared at the original mainframe, then turned to me. He asked what this place was. He said admins didn't have clearance for sub-level 3. I pulled my master keycard from my pocket. I swiped it through the terminal reader. The secondary monitor flared to life. It displayed the Aegis Biometric's foundational architecture. I told him I wasn't an admin. I handed him the Caspian Group Blind Trust Formation papers. I said, I own the building. I own the company. I watched his eyes scan the faded 1998 signatures. He saw my late husband's name. Then he saw mine. The shock hit him first. His jaw literally dropped open. He looked from the paper to my face. Then I saw the exact moment it changed. It turned into fierce, undeniable loyalty. He hated Julian just as much as I did. I told him Julian was bleeding us dry. I said, I need you to find the artery. Marcus cracked his knuckles. He sat in my worn leather chair and went to work. His fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. The clacking sound echoed in the small room. It took him exactly 42 minutes to find Julian's fatal mistake. Julian had created a shadow ledger. He kept it hidden on a partition drive within his local laptop. He thought a hidden volume was enough to fool corporate security. He forgot Marcus wrote our original security protocols. Marcus stopped typing. He pointed at the screen. He whispered, "Got him." I leaned over his shoulder. The screen displayed exported wire transfer logs from the company's operating account. The paper trail never lies. There it was, 6 consecutive monthly wires, exactly $400,000 each. The recipient was an LLC called Apex Solutions. The memo line read, Strategic Synergy Consulting. My stomach turned. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my throat. My hands went completely cold. My mind snapped back to the company town hall 6 months ago. We were all packed into the main glass boardroom. The room smelled like cheap catered coffee and nervous sweat. Julian stood at the front, wearing a bespoke $5,000 suit. He gripped the wooden podium. He looked the staff in the eye. He told them we had to tighten our belts. He announced a total freeze on employee bonuses. He called it trimming the fat. I remember watching a single mother from accounting quietly cry in the back row. While Julian was giving that slick, hypocritical speech, he was actively robbing them. He was wiring $400,000 a month to a phantom vendor. I placed my hand on the cold metal edge of the desk. I told Marcus to pull the state registration for Apex Solutions. Marcus opened a new browser tab. He typed rapidly. We ran the tax ID for Apex Solutions through the Georgia Secretary of State database. The loading icon spun for 3 agonizing seconds. The corporate filing appeared on the screen. The registered agent wasn't a corporate lawyer. It was a residential address I knew intimately. Topic Chapter 4. I stared at that Georgia Secretary of State filing until the letters literally blurred together. 2440 Peachtree Road, Unit 4B. The basement server room suddenly felt freezing. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. I knew that address. I didn't just know it. I bought that exact condo in 2015 as an investment property. By 11:30 p.m., I was sitting behind the wheel of my Mercedes SUV. I drove straight up Interstate 85 toward Buckhead. The highway was dead quiet. The dashboard clock glowed a faint, clinical white in the dark cabin. It was 11:42 p.m. I pulled into the visitor parking lot of the luxury complex. I cut the engine. The night air was heavy and thick with Georgia humidity. The cicadas were screaming in the trees. I rolled down my window and looked up at the 4th floor. Unit 4B was completely dark. No lamps. No faint blue glow from a television screen. Just black glass reflecting the orange streetlights below. It was an empty unit, a ghost apartment being used as a corporate mail drop. I reached over into my passenger seat and grabbed my iPad. The screen illuminated my face. I logged directly into the Fulton County Public Property Records portal. The paper trail never lies. I typed in the Peachtree Road address. I had transferred the deed years ago to a family holding trust. Now the portal showed a new registered owner, a Delaware LLC. It was a classic nesting doll corporate structure. One shell company owning another, designed to hide the final beneficiary. But arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. They always leave a fingerprint. I pulled up the digitized warranty deed from last October. The file was 80 pages long. The PDF loaded slowly over the cellular connection. I pinched the screen and zoomed in on the bottom of page 3. The signature line for the registered agent. There was a standard blue notary stamp. Right next to it was the authorizing signature for the LLC formation. My breath caught sharply in my throat. My hand started shaking against the leather steering wheel. I could feel my heartbeat pulsing in my neck. It wasn't Julian's signature. It was a name signed in a frantic, messy scrawl, but the first letter was unmistakable. A distinct, sharp loop on the P. It hooked back on itself like a jagged fishhook. My mind violently snapped back to the year 2010. We were sitting at the cold granite kitchen island in my old house. I was reviewing college application essays. A 17-year-old boy was sitting across from me. He was chewing nervously on the cap of a blue ballpoint pen. I had watched him write that exact, unique looping P 1,000 times on homework assignments. Pierce, my late husband's son, the boy I helped raise since he was 7 years old. I dropped the iPad onto the center console. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet car. I felt completely hollowed out. A physical ache radiated through my ribs. The betrayal tasted like copper in my mouth. Julian didn't just find a random empty address to register his phantom vendors. He had an inside man. Someone with access to the family trust documents. I snatched the iPad back up. I accessed Julian's synchronized Outlook calendar. I needed to know exactly how they were communicating. I scrolled aggressively through his weekly schedule. Monday was clear. But every Tuesday from 2 to 4 in the afternoon, there was a blocked out section. It simply read, Venture Capital Mentorship. The location was listed as a private, members-only club in Midtown. Julian wasn't mentoring anyone. He was meeting with Pierce. They were sitting in leather chairs, drinking scotch, and coordinating the theft of my life's work. Have you ever felt your reality just fracture into pieces? It physically hurts. You lose your breath and you can't get it back. 3 years of mourning my husband. 3 years of trying to protect his legacy from corporate vultures, and his own flesh and blood was selling it for scrap. I sat in my car outside that dark, empty condo, the truth settling in my chest like lead. Julian wasn't just a thief. He was an accomplice to my own family. Topic, Chapter 5. I didn't cry in the car. I didn't scream. I just gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. It was 11:42 p.m. on Wednesday. The condo building stood completely dark against the Buckhead skyline. My stepson was the inside man. Pierce was the registered agent for the shell company stealing my life's work. I put the Mercedes in drive. I headed straight back downtown. By 1:15 a.m., I was back in the basement server room. The ambient temperature was a freezing 62 degrees. The cooling fans roared in the tight space. I sat in the cheap mesh chair. I stared at the master terminal. The financial trail was locked down. I had the wire transfers. I had the property deeds. But Julian Mercer was a meticulous CEO. He was entirely too smart to use Aegis biometric servers to collude with Pierce. They had to be communicating off the grid. I picked up my phone. I called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. His voice was thick with sleep. I told him about the condo. I told him about Pierce. The line went dead silent. Then I heard him exhale a long, heavy breath. I told him we needed to pivot. We needed communications. Marcus logged in remotely. He set up a packet sniffer on the executive floor's Wi-Fi router. It was a digital net. It would catch every single byte of data moving through the airwaves upstairs. Thursday morning arrived. It was 08:45 a.m. I was sitting at my admin desk in the third floor bullpen. The smell of cheap office coffee drifted from the kitchenette. I had my secondary monitor angled away from the main aisle. I pulled up the internal security camera feeds. At 09:05 a.m., Julian walked into the executive floor break room. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit. He stepped up to the silver espresso machine. I watched his body language on the screen. He was tense. He looked over his left shoulder. A quick paranoid glance toward the hallway. Then he reached into his inside jacket pocket. He didn't pull out his company-issued iPhone. He pulled out a second unregistered device, a cheap black burner phone. I smiled at the screen. A cold, predatory satisfaction settled deep in my chest. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. He thought he was a ghost. He thought a burner phone made him invisible. But he was impatient. He didn't want to burn cellular data deep inside a steel-framed high-rise. So he connected that burner to the executive Wi-Fi network. Down in the hidden server room, Marcus's packet sniffer went to work. It captured the exact handshake protocol when the burner connected. The device immediately pinged an offshore encrypted messaging app. The message contents were locked behind military-grade encryption, but the metadata wasn't. The push notification preview was transmitted in plain text. Marcus intercepted it. He forwarded the raw data packet straight to my secure inbox. I clicked open the file. The plain text metadata stared back at me. It was a scheduled meeting invite. The text read, Capitol Grill, 8 p.m. Bring the Q4 projections. T.S. P.S. Pierce Sterling. My hands went completely numb. The boy I taught to drive was orchestrating a corporate coup. He wasn't just a passive partner in this embezzlement. He was actively directing Julian's actions. He was demanding the unredacted Q4 projections. He was calling the shots. The Capitol Grill was a high-end steakhouse right here in Buckhead. It was a very public place for a very private treason. They thought the ambient noise would protect them. They thought they were untouchable. I closed the security feed. I locked my terminal. He was meeting Pierce tonight, and I was going to make sure they had an invisible, uninvited guest at their table. Topic. Chapter 6. I walked through the heavy mahogany doors of the Capitol Grill in Buckhead at 7:45 p.m. The low lighting was perfect for secrets. The host didn't look twice at me. I wore a dark auburn wig and oversized tortoiseshell glasses. My usual tailored suits were replaced by a generic black cashmere wrap. I looked like a tired tourist. I slid into a curved leather booth in the back corner. The restaurant smelled of charred steak and expensive red wine. My booth was exactly 2 tables away from Julian's reservation. I placed my black designer handbag on the table. I pointed the brass clasp directly outward. Hidden inside the lining was a specialized directional microphone. Marcus had calibrated it for me that afternoon. It was designed to isolate voices and filter out background noise. I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. A flat green line stretched across the dark screen, waiting for audio. My hands were ice cold. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. At exactly 8:02 p.m., Julian walked into the dining room. Pierce was right behind him. Pierce wore a bespoke navy suit. He walked with that same arrogant stride his father used to have. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. The ambient noise of the restaurant faded away. Suddenly, I wasn't in Buckhead anymore. It was 2018. We were standing at my late husband's grave. The freezing rain was soaking right through my wool coat. Pierce was crying. He held my hand so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked at me through the rain. He said, "We'll protect Dad's legacy together, Layla." The sharp clink of crystal glasses snapped me back to the present. I opened my eyes. I was back in the steakhouse. The waiter set down 2 heavy pours of Macallan scotch. Julian waited for the waiter to leave. Then he slid a thick manila folder across the white tablecloth. "The unredacted Q4 projections," Julian said. His voice was low, but the directional mic caught every syllable. The green line on my phone spiked into sharp, jagged blue waves. Pierce opened the folder. He ran a manicured finger down the printed column of numbers. He smiled. It was a cold, unfamiliar, predatory smile. "Perfect," Pierce said. "The manufactured deficit is holding beautifully. We report a massive quarterly loss on Monday morning." You know that feeling when a betrayal is so deep it physically burns your chest? I felt the heat rising in my throat. My brain raced. I stared at the blue waveform bouncing across my screen. They weren't just embezzling millions to buy offshore condos. They were artificially deflating the company's valuation. Julian took a slow sip of his scotch. "The board is already panicking," Julian said. "They'll approve a fire sale just to stop the bleeding." Pierce leaned in closer over the table. "Once the stock dips below $12 a share, my private equity firm triggers the hostile buyout." I watched the recording timer tick past 8 minutes. Every single word was saving directly to my encrypted cloud server. "You get your $10 million golden parachute," Pierce continued. He raised his heavy crystal glass. "And the old witch gets nothing." Julian laughed. Their scotch glasses chimed together in a sickening celebratory toast. The air completely left my lungs. The old witch, that was me. The woman who paid his Ivy League tuition. The woman who built his entire inheritance from the ground up. I gripped the edge of the mahogany table, my fingernails dug deep into the polished wood. I didn't shed a single tear. I just sat there in the shadows. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. Pierce was absolutely drowning in it. He thought he was playing a game with an oblivious elderly admin. The paper trail never lies, and now I had the pristine audio confession to match it. I picked up my phone and stopped the recording. The truth was finally laid bare on the table. They weren't just stealing money, they were manufacturing a corporate bankruptcy to steal my entire company. And the board vote to approve the emergency sale was in exactly 48 hours. Topic Chapter 7. I left the Capitol Grill parking lot at 8:42 p.m. The 8-minute audio file was already secured on my encrypted cloud server. I had exactly 48 hours until the emergency board vote on Saturday. A recording of a conversation is just leverage. I needed a bulletproof federal crime to stop that vote. I drove straight back to downtown Atlanta. The Interstate 85 traffic was a blur of red taillights. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel of my Mercedes SUV. My mind was racing through the legal definitions of corporate espionage. I parked in the sub-basement of the Aegis building. I took the freight elevator down to sublevel 3. I swiped my master keycard and walked into the hidden server room. The industrial air conditioning blasted my face. The room hummed with the sound of cooling fans. Marcus was already there. He was hunched over the main master terminal. The blue glow from the secondary monitor reflected off his glasses. He didn't even say hello. He just pointed at the screen. "We have a massive data hemorrhage," he said. I dropped my heavy canvas backpack on the floor. I leaned over his shoulder. The terminal window was throwing red alert banners across the screen. It was a massive, unauthorized data packet transfer. I checked the digital dashboard clock on the wall. It was 2014 a.m. on Friday. I pulled up the internal security camera feeds on my iPad. I clicked on Julian's executive office. There he was, sitting in the dark at his desk. The heavy mahogany doors were shut tight. The only light in the room came from his local laptop. He was watching a progress bar slowly crawl across the screen. He had a crystal glass of Macallan Scotch in his hand. He took a slow, deliberate sip. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. He wasn't just manipulating the Q4 projections to tank the stock. He was stealing the crown jewel, the Aegis proprietary biometric source code. If Pierce was going to trigger a hostile buyout for pennies, he needed the actual tech. I asked Marcus where the data was going. His fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. "It's routing to an external AWS server," he said. "But look at the destination IP address handling the handshake." He brought up the raw registry data. The text on the screen was undeniable. The IP address belonged to Vanguard Equity. Pierce's private equity firm. My late husband's son was actively downloading my life's work. My chest felt completely hollow. I gripped the cold metal edge of the master terminal. A paper trail never lies. Pierce wasn't just the inside man for a corporate coup. He was orchestrating a digital heist. Julian took another arrogant sip of his scotch on the camera feed. The progress bar hit 82%. Marcus looked up at me. His face was tight with panic. The raw data packet was enormous. Decades of biometric architecture slipping out the back door in the middle of the night. Millions of lines of proprietary code. Once that code hit Pierce's servers, the company was essentially dead. They wouldn't even need the board vote on Saturday. They would already own the only thing of value. The progress bar ticked up to 87%. My eyes were locked on Julian's smug face through the security feed. He adjusted his bespoke charcoal suit jacket. He looked like a man who had already won. He had no idea I was watching him from 3 floors down. He had no idea I built the very network he was trying to rob. The transfer speed suddenly spiked, 91%. Marcus's hand hovered over the kill switch. "Do I cut him off?" he asked. His voice was shaking. "I can sever the connection right now and lock his terminal." I stared at the red alert banners flashing on our monitor. I thought about the 48-hour deadline. I thought about Pierce's empty condo in Buckhead. I shook my head. "No, let him steal it. We need the felony on record." The progress bar on Marcus's secondary monitor hit 100%. The screen flashed a sterile, blinding white. "Transfer complete," Marcus whispered. His voice was actually shaking. I leaned back in my cheap mesh chair. The basement server room was freezing. My hands, however, were perfectly steady. It was 2014 a.m. on Friday morning. We were exactly 40 hours away from the emergency Saturday board vote. Julian Mercer had just committed a massive federal crime. We had the live raw registry data to prove it. The internal security camera feeds showed him sitting right at his desk. Vanguard Equity now possessed the Aegis proprietary biometric source code. At least, that is what Julian and Pierce thought. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. You don't build a billion-dollar fortress and leave the back door unlocked. I nodded at Marcus. He immediately typed a 12-digit command into his mechanical keyboard. We hadn't just watched the download happen. We had actively chaperoned it. As the massive data packet left our secure servers, Marcus altered the core cryptographic keys. We injected a digital poison pill deep into the architecture. To Julian, the stolen file looked absolutely pristine. To Pierce's private equity developers, it would look like a technological gold mine. But the moment they actually tried to compile that source code, it would instantly and violently corrupt itself. It was designed to wipe their local drives entirely. They hadn't stolen my company's future. They had stolen a digital bomb. I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. The heavy hum of the basement servers seemed to fade away. My mind drifted back exactly 30 years. It was 1994. I was sitting in my freezing, damp garage in Midtown. I was staring at a massive, bulky CRT monitor. My eyes were burning from pure exhaustion. I had been awake for 3 days straight. Then the black screen pinged. A bright green line spiked across the glass. It was the very first successful biometric match I ever coded. That original code was my late husband's legacy. It was the foundation of my entire life's work. I was never going to let an estranged, greedy stepson take it from me. By 4 a.m., I was back in my own home office. The house was dead silent. I walked into the kitchenette and poured a cup of black coffee. The hot ceramic mug finally warmed my freezing fingers. I carried it to my heavy oak desk. I sat down on my personal laptop and opened my secure email client. I started a new message to the company's external legal counsel. My keystrokes echoed in the quiet room. I typed out the subject line, immediate termination of J. Mercer for cause. Then, I started attaching the evidence. I attached the unredacted Q3 General Ledger outbound wire transfers. I attached the Fulton County digitized warranty deed with Pierce's signature. I attached the 8-minute pristine audio recording from the Capitol Grill. Finally, I attached the server logs showing the Vanguard Equity Handshake IP address. The paper trail never lies. The trap was fully constructed. I hovered my mouse over the screen and hit Save Draft. A massive wave of weary relief washed over my chest. The adrenaline of the last few days finally crashed. I didn't need a public spectacle on Saturday. I didn't need to blow up the board meeting and reveal my identity. I could just hand this thick digital file to HR. Julian would be escorted out of the building in handcuffs by noon. I could handle Pierce's betrayal privately, family member to family member. I closed the laptop case. I watched the morning sun start to peek through my office blinds. The Atlanta sky turned to pale, bruised purple. I took a sip of my coffee. I thought I had won. I thought I could just hand the file to HR and be done with it. But at exactly 6 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID lit up the dark wood of my desk. It was the chairman of the board. Top to Chapter 9. The caller ID glowing in my dark kitchen said Chairman Davis. It was exactly 6 a.m. on Friday. Board members do not call low-level archivists before dawn, not unless someone is already dead. I picked up the phone. The aluminum casing felt freezing against my palm. I pressed accept. I didn't say hello. I just waited. Davis sounded out of breath. He said, "Layla, I'm sorry to call so early." I asked him what was wrong. He told me Julian had just triggered an emergency board protocol. The boat was moved up. Not Saturday. Today. At 9 a.m., I looked at the digital clock on my microwave. I had less than 3 hours. I asked Davis for the official reason. He hesitated. Then he told me the truth. Julian claimed he found catastrophic irregularities in the legacy archives overnight. A massive financial black hole. $4 million. Missing. Davis lowered his voice. He said, "He's blaming you, Layla." Julian was going to present me as a rogue employee. A bitter, aging archivist embezzling company funds. He was using me as the scapegoat to justify an immediate fire sale. The buyer, of course, would be Pierce's private equity firm. I hung up the phone. The call log on my screen showed exactly 3 minutes. The timestamp was 6:02 a.m. My kitchen was completely silent. You know that feeling when your gut drops out of your body? I didn't feel that. I just felt a blinding absolute clarity wash over me. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. Julian thought I was just a convenient idiot. I walked straight out of the kitchen and into my home office. I sat down at my heavy oak desk. I booted up my personal laptop. I needed to see what Julian was doing right now. I bypassed the Aegis firewall and accessed the outdoor security cameras. I pulled up the executive parking garage feed. The timestamp in the corner read 5:30 a.m. Julian's silver Mercedes SUV was already parked in his reserved spot. I watched the playback. Julian stepped out of the driver's side. He was wearing his bespoke charcoal suit, but it was what he was carrying that caught my eye. He had 4 thick black binders tucked under his arm. Fabricated evidence. He had spent the night printing out fake ledger discrepancies. He was going to walk into that boardroom and bury me in paper. He thought a mountain of fake documents would panic the board into selling. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. The paper trail never lies. But Jillian was about to learn that my paper trail was real. I opened my secure email client. The draft to my external legal counsel was still sitting there. The Vanguard Equity server logs. The Fulton County deed. The Capitol Grill audio. I didn't hit send. Not yet. I wanted to see the look on his face. I reached into my heavy steel fireproof safe. I pulled out a sleek black encrypted hard drive. It held every piece of raw registry data Marcus and I had compiled. I dropped it into my black designer handbag. The brass clasp snapped shut. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. By 7:15 a.m., I was in my car. I merged onto Highway 400 southbound. The morning sun was glaring through the windshield. Traffic was barely moving. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel. I thought about Pierce. He helped Julian orchestrate this specific frame-up. They were going to destroy my reputation to steal my late husband's legacy. I turned on the radio, then immediately snapped it off. The silence was better. I mentally reviewed the unredacted Q3 outbound wire transfers. I pictured Julian's shadow ledger. I had the undeniable proof of his offshore shell companies. I had the IP addresses linking Apex Solutions to Pierce's condo. Julian's 4 binders were nothing but theater. My black hard drive was a digital bomb. I took the Lenox Road exit. The Aegis Biometrics glass tower loomed against the Atlanta skyline. I pulled into the underground garage at 8:10 a.m. The concrete walls of the garage were damp from morning rain. I parked 3 spots away from Julian's Mercedes. I turned off the engine. I sat in the quiet cabin for exactly 60 seconds. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I adjusted my oversized tortoiseshell glasses. I smoothed the lapels of my generic black cashmere wrap. I looked exactly like the tired, invisible admin they expected. The perfect victim. I grabbed my handbag from the passenger seat. I walked to the executive elevator. I swiped my master key card. The door slid open. I pressed the button for the top floor. The main glass boardroom was waiting. The board members would be gathering now, drinking coffee from the silver carafe. Whispering about the catastrophic losses, Julian would be standing at the wooden podium, ready to play the hero. Julian thought he was walking into a boardroom to fire a helpless, 58-year-old archivist. He had no idea I was bringing the guillotine. Topic Chapter 10. I didn't sleep a single minute Thursday night. By 7 a.m. Friday, I was standing inside the Aegis Print Center on Sublevel 2. The air smelled fiercely of hot toner and ozone. Marcus was already waiting for me. He had bypassed the security locks on the high-speed commercial printers. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. I plugged my sleek black encrypted hard drive directly into the master console. I selected the master file. I hit print. Julian thought he was so clever. He spent all night printing his 4 black binders of fake ledger discrepancies. He thought he was just framing an invisible, low-level admin. But Julian wasn't just stealing $4 million. That was the lie I was supposed to believe. The truth was infinitely worse. I watched the first massive printer hum to life. Blank pages began flying into the output tray. The missing money went straight to Apex Solutions, a Delaware shell company, registered to my stepson, Pierce. My chest tightened just thinking about it. The boy I helped raise. Pierce wasn't just taking a cut of embezzled funds. He was actively bleeding my life's work dry. They were manufacturing a massive quarterly loss to panic the board. They wanted to tank the stock price. Then Pierce's private equity firm would swoop in. A hostile takeover for pennies on the dollar. And that mandate Julian sent out, the one about physically destroying our legacy servers by the end of the month? It finally made perfect sense. He wasn't modernizing our hardware. He was destroying the unalterable backups of our original source code. He needed the originals gone before Pierce could steal and sell the IP. The commercial printers whirred around us. 400 pages per copy, 10 copies in total. Every single unredacted wire transfer, every encrypted text message from Julian's burner phone, the raw registry data of the Vanguard Equity IP theft, the complete transcript of their Capitol Grill confession, the heavy rhythmic thud of the paper hitting the plastic trays took me back. 1996. I was 30 years old. I was defending my very first patent. It was a boardroom full of skeptical, arrogant male investors. They wore expensive tailored suits. They smiled at me like I was a law secretary. I slammed a 3-inch technical manual onto their pristine glass table. The loud cracks silenced the room instantly. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. I was about to prove it again. Marcus handed me the thick, pitch-black covers. We worked in silence. We bound each massive stack of paper with heavy industrial steel coils. I loaded the 10 completed dossiers onto a metal rolling cart. I pulled out my phone. I took a single photograph of the stack for my own records. 10 massive black-bound dossiers stacked perfectly. The title page was printed in bold white Arial font. It simply read, "The Autopsy of Julian Mercer." I ran my bare hand over the smooth black cover of the top copy. It felt heavy. A deep feeling of inevitable finality washed over me. The paper trail never lies. At 8:30 a.m., I pushed the heavy metal cart onto the executive elevator. The brass doors slid shut. I hit the glowing button for the top floor. I wheeled the cart straight into the executive break room. It was just down the hall from the main glass boardroom. I parked the cart out of sight, right behind the silver espresso machine. I stood there in the quiet room. The digital clock on the microwave glowed neon green. It read 8:45 a.m. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9. Julian was about to present his fabricated financial crisis. You know that feeling when the trap is perfectly set? When you are just holding your breath, waiting for the rat to step on the spring? At 8:50 a.m., Julian walked past the break room doors. He stopped and backed up. He saw me standing by the espresso machine. He smiled. It was a cold, predatory smirk. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke charcoal suit jacket. He looked right at me. "Black, 2 sugars, Layla," he said, "and make it quick. Top at chapter 11, black, 2 sugars, make it quick." Those were his exact words. I didn't blink. I didn't argue. I just turned back to the silver espresso machine. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. I grabbed a heavy porcelain mug from the cabinet. The ceramic was cold against my fingers. I placed it under the spout and pressed the double shot button. The machine hummed to life. Dark liquid poured into the white cup. I stirred in exactly 2 packets of raw sugar. I watched the grains dissolve into the black coffee. It was 8:52 a.m. I placed the mug perfectly in the center of a polished silver tray. Then I walked out of the break room and headed for the sub-level print center. My metal rolling cart was waiting for me. The cart was heavy. It held 10 pitch black covers, 10 400-page dossiers. I had titled them The Autopsy of Julian Mercer. I had spent 3 hours printing them on the high-speed commercial printers. The thick stacks of paper were still warm. Inside were the exported wire transfer logs from the operating account, the Fulton County digitized warranty deed with Pierce's signature, the raw registry data proving the Vanguard equity theft, the complete Capitol Grill audio transcript. Every single lie mapped and proven with forensic precision. I placed the silver tray with the coffee right on top of the stack. I adjusted the lapels of my tailored charcoal wool blazer. I took a deep breath. The air in the basement smelled like ozone and hot toner. My heart was beating in a slow, steady rhythm. I grabbed the cold metal handle of the cart. I pushed the cart onto the executive elevator. I pressed the button for the top floor. The digital display ticked upward. At 8:58 a.m., the door slid open. I stepped out into the glass hallway. The wheels of the cart glided silently over the plush carpet. I knew Marcus was watching me from the hidden server room. He had the indoor security cameras pulled up on his master terminal. He was tracking my exact position. He was waiting for my signal to lock down the building's network. On his screen, I probably looked like an executioner. I certainly felt like one. I stopped outside the heavy mahogany doors of the main glass boardroom. I could hear Julian's voice echoing through the thick wood. It was 9:04 a.m. He'd already started the emergency meeting. I pushed the doors open. The air conditioning in the room was freezing. 7 board members sat around the massive oak table. They all had copies of Julian's 4 thick black binders of fake ledger discrepancies. Chairman Davis was at the far end, rubbing his temples. He looked completely exhausted. Julian stood at the wooden podium at the front of the room. He was wearing his bespoke $5,000 suit. He held a small green laser pointer in his right hand. I looked at the massive projector screen behind him. The slide title was written in bold red letters. Legacy Mismanagement, the Layla Sterling Liability. He had a bulleted list underneath detailing the $4 million deficit. He was actually doing it. He was blaming the missing money on my admin persona. He was painting me as a confused, aging employee who had ruined the accounts. The paper trail never lies, but Julian certainly did. The room fell dead silent when I rolled the metal cart inside. 7 heads turned to look at me. Julian paused his presentation. He lowered the laser pointer. A nauseating smirk spread across his face. He looked at the board members, then back to me. Layla, he said, his voice dripping with nauseating arrogance. Thank you for the coffee. You can leave it right here. He tapped the edge of the wooden podium. He was performing for them, showing them how he handled the incompetent staff who had supposedly just lost them millions. I didn't say a single word. I gripped the handle of the cart and pushed it forward. The wheels squeaked faintly against the polished hardwood floor. I stopped right next to his podium. The 10-thick black dossier sat stacked like industrial steel coils. The sheer physical mass of the paper was undeniable. Julian didn't even look at the cart. He was too busy looking at his own reflection in the eyes of the board. I picked up the silver tray. I lifted the porcelain mug. The ceramic was still warm in my palm. I set the coffee down in front of him. Julian smiled at me. That will be all, Layla, he said. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't move toward the door. Instead, I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a small black fob. Then I pressed the button that electronically locked the boardroom doors. The heavy magnetic locks on the mahogany doors engaged with a wet, solid thud. It echoed like a gunshot. Then came the absolute suffocating silence. Every head in the main glass boardroom snapped toward me, 12 highly paid executives, 1 chairman, and Julian. Julian's smug smile didn't entirely vanish right away. It just froze on his face. He stared at the small black fob in my right hand. Layla, what are you doing? He asked. His voice had that familiar, infuriatingly condescending edge. Just 2 weeks ago, in this exact room, he had waved his hand dismissively at me. Make sure the oat milk isn't expired, he had said. I didn't answer him. I didn't even look at him. I walked straight past his ridiculous wooden podium. The projector screen behind him was still glowing brightly. It displayed my name next to his fake $4 million deficit. I stepped directly to the head of the massive oak and glass table. Chairman Davis was sitting with his hands steepled in front of him. He was watching me with a very specific, calculating expression. My heart was beating in a slow, steady rhythm. My hands were perfectly still. I reached into my black designer handbag. My fingers brushed past the cold brass clasp. I pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper. I slid it across the polished glass surface of the table. It stopped exactly 1 inch from the chairman's fingertips. Gentlemen, I said. My voice was completely steady and cold. My name is Layla Sterling. I am not your administrative assistant. I am the sole executor of the Caspian Group Blind Trust. I watched the words physically hit them. Shock rippled through the sterile, air-conditioned room. One of the board members actually dropped his blue ballpoint pen. It clattered loudly against the glass tabletop. The paper trail never lies. That single document was the Caspian Group Trust Proxy authorization. It bore a raised blue notarized seal dated October 1998. As the proxy, I control 51% of Aegis Biometric's voting shares. I continued. I own this building. I own the proprietary source code. And I possess unilateral authority to hire, fire, and dissolve this board. Julian let out a sharp, nervous laugh. He looked around the long table, waiting for someone to join him. No one did. The silence in the room was deafening. This is insane, Julian snapped. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Davis, she's a disgruntled admin. She's having a psychotic break. Call building security immediately. Chairman Davis didn't reach for his phone. He picked up the single sheet of paper. He slowly adjusted his tortoiseshell reading glasses. He examined the notarized seal under the harsh fluorescent lights. The room was so quiet, I could hear the low hum of the projector fan. Davis lowered the paper. He looked up at Julian. The authorization is authentic, Julian. Davis said quietly, Mrs. Sterling holds the majority. I watched the color completely drain from Julian's face. It happened in real time. The arrogant, untouchable CEO vanished. In his place stood a terrified man. He suddenly realized he was trapped in a cage of his own making. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. He had spent months building his little corporate coup with Pierce. He had spent all night printing 4 pathetic binders of fabricated evidence. He never once considered the quiet older woman pouring his black coffee. I looked down at the metal rolling cart beside me. Underneath the polished silver tray and the ceramic mug sat my real presentation. 10 heavy, pitch-black covers. 10 400-page forensic dossiers. Every single wire transfer. Every burner text. The Capitol Grill audio transcript. The raw registry data, all meticulously compiled and verified by Marcus. Julian's eyes darted to the locked mahogany doors. Then his gaze dropped to the metal cart. His breathing grew shallow. I could see his chest rising and falling rapidly beneath his bespoke charcoal suit jacket. He knew he was cornered. Julian stammered, trying to pivot, calling it a misunderstanding. That's when I grabbed the first black dossier and slammed it onto the glass table so hard it cracked his coffee mug. Topic Chapter 13. The hot black coffee bled across the massive glass table. The crack of Julian's ceramic mug echoed in the dead silence. Nobody breathed. I pushed the first pitch-black dossier toward Chairman Davis. It weighed exactly 4 pounds. I grabbed the metal rolling cart. I walked around the long oak and glass table. I dropped a copy in front of every single executive. 10 heavy dossiers. 400 pages of absolute ruin per binder. Julian just stood there at the wooden podium. His green laser pointer was trembling in his hand. The little green dot danced nervously against the projector screen. I looked at the board members. Open them, I said. The sound of heavy cardstock turning filled the room. Turn to page 42, I instructed. Chairman Davis adjusted his tortoiseshell reading glasses. He traced his index finger down the glossy page. I watched the muscles in his jaw tighten. What you are looking at are the exported wire transfer logs, I said. 6 consecutive months of outbound payments from our operating account. $400,000 a month. Routed directly to a Delaware shell company called Apex Solutions. I walked back to the head of the table. I tapped my fingernail against the glass surface. Look at the bottom right corner of page 42. That is Julian's unique electronic signature authorizing the fraudulent wires. The paper trail never lies. I watched the color drain from the faces around the table. These were seasoned executives. They knew exactly what they were looking at. Corporate treason. Julian finally found his voice. This is a fabrication, he stammered. His face was completely bloodless. He gripped the edges of the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. Layla is a disgruntled admin trying to save her job. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. I didn't even blink. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen 3 times. I synced my device directly to the boardroom surround sound speakers. Let's see what the disgruntled admin fabricated next, I said. I pressed play on the pristine 8-minute audio recording. The crystal clear sound of a busy steakhouse filled the boardroom. The clinking of crystal glasses, the low hum of the Capitol Grill in Buckhead. Then, Julian's voice boomed from the ceiling speakers. The Q4 numbers look catastrophic, Pierce. Just like we planned. Half the board physically recoiled in their leather chairs. Chairman Davis took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Then came the voice of my estranged stepson. Good. We'd trigger the buyout when the stock hits $12. The recording kept playing. They discussed the $10 million golden parachute. They laughed about tanking my late husband's legacy. I looked at Julian. His bespoke charcoal suit suddenly looked 3 sizes too big. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. The digital clock on the wall read 9:18 a.m. Julian broke. He abandoned the wooden podium. He practically dove toward his chair. He grabbed his leather briefcase. He started frantically shoving his laptop inside. He threw his 4 fake binders in after it. His hands were shaking violently. He dropped his phone on the carpet. He didn't even bother to pick it up. He just bolted for the exit. Julian grabbed the cold brass handle of the heavy mahogany doors. He yanked it. Nothing happened. He yanked it again, putting his entire body weight into it. The magnetic locks held firm. I watched him claw at the door like a trapped animal. The indoor security cameras in the corners of the room caught every second. His claustrophobic panic was being broadcast directly to Marcus downstairs. Julian spun around, his chest heaving. The entire board was just staring at him in absolute disgust. The audio recording was still playing over the speakers. Pierce's voice was currently detailing the theft of our biometric source code. I walked slowly toward Julian. My heels clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor. I stopped exactly 3 feet away from him. I looked him dead in the eye. "You're fired, Julian," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But you're not leaving." Because Marcus didn't just lock the doors, he opened a loading dock for the FBI. Topic: Chapter 14. I stepped back and pressed the small black fob in my pocket. The heavy magnetic locks on the mahogany doors disengaged with a loud echoing click. The sound cut through the dead silence of the boardroom. 3 federal agents in dark windbreakers walked right in. They didn't knock. They didn't introduce themselves. They just moved straight toward the head of the oak and glass table. Julian didn't even try to run. He couldn't. His legs seemed completely frozen. He just stood there, staring down at the pitch-black dossier. His face was the color of wet ash. The lead agent grabbed Julian's shoulder and turned him around. He started reading him his rights in a flat, bored voice. The metallic snap of the steel handcuffs was incredibly loud in that quiet room. I watched the agent pull Julian's wrists behind his back. His bespoke $5,000 charcoal suit jacket bunched up awkwardly over the thick steel chain. It ruined the perfect tailoring completely. I remembered him standing in the executive break room just 2 weeks ago. He had this arrogant, untouchable smirk on his face. He had looked right at me and called me the coffee girl. Now, that smug memory faded into the pathetic reality right in front of me. His eyes were wide, darting around the room for help. He looked like a terrified little boy. The agents marched him toward the glass doors. I walked over to the glass wall and watched them leave. They escorted him straight out into the 3rd floor bullpen. The entire open plan office stopped working. Dozens of employees stood up from their cheap mesh chairs. Phones were ringing on desks, but nobody answered them. The typing stopped. They all just watched their untouchable CEO get perp-walked past the break room. Nobody said a single word. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. It blinds you to the exits until they are all locked. I turned back to the massive boardroom table. The 12 board members were still frozen in their leather chairs. The smell of Julian's spilled dark roast coffee hung in the air. Chairman Davis was staring at page 42 of the dossier. He slowly took off his tortoiseshell reading glasses. He looked up at me. He asked exactly how deep Pierce's involvement went. I told him Pierce orchestrated the entire hostile takeover from the beginning. I explained the digital poison pill Pierce had planned to compile on our servers. I watched the blood drain from the chairman's face. The room went dead silent again. They finally realized my late husband's son had tried to destroy their entire livelihoods. I walked slowly to the head of the table. Julian's cracked ceramic mug was still sitting there, leaking cold coffee onto the glass. I pushed it aside. Then I sat down in the high-backed leather CEO chair. It was the first time I had sat in that specific chair in 3 years. The leather was cool against my palms. A heavy, grounded authority settled deep into my chest. I looked at the executives staring back at me. I told them Julian Mercer was officially terminated for cause. I informed them I was reinstating myself as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Chairman Davis nodded once. The rest of the board murmured their absolute agreement. My phone buzzed on the glass table. It was a text from Marcus. It said, "Building network is fully locked down. We're secure." I looked back up at the board. I told them we had a new Chief Information Security Officer, Marcus Adeyemi. I reminded them he wrote our original security protocols, and he just saved this company. No one argued. The paper trail never lies. 10 minutes later, I was alone in my new executive office, Julian's old office. I sat at the heavy oak desk and pulled up the internal security camera feeds. I watched the live footage from the sub-level loading dock. The agents pushed Julian into the back of a dark federal SUV. The heavy door slammed shut on camera. The SUV drove up the concrete ramp and out into the bright Atlanta sunlight. Gone. Just like that. Julian was facing 20 years for corporate espionage and wire fraud. But there was still one loose end. The boy who called me an old witch on tape. It was 10:15 a.m. on Friday. Julian's dark federal SUV had just cleared the executive parking garage. I watched the taillights disappear on the security feed, but my work wasn't finished. I still had one loose end left to tie, Pierce. Right about now, Pierce was sitting in a sleek private equity office. He was probably watching Vanguard Equity's servers compile the stolen source code. He thought he had the keys to the kingdom. He didn't. Marcus and I had designed that digital bomb perfectly. The moment Pierce's servers tried to unpack the biometric data, the payload executed. It was designed to violently corrupt and wipe Vanguard's local drives. Every single byte of data they had. Financial records, client portfolios, gone. I could almost hear the cooling fans screaming as the servers melted down. I turned away from the monitors. I walked over to the high-backed leather CEO chair. The leather was still warm from Julian. I sat down and placed my black designer handbag on the massive oak desk. I unclasped the cold brass hardware. I pulled out a single heavy sheet of legal paper. It was a formal notice of trust severance. I didn't call the FBI on my stepson. Prison was too simple. I wanted to dismantle his entire reality. I smoothed the crisp paper flat on the desk. It invoked Section 4B of the Caspian Group Blind Trust, the morality clause. It explicitly forbade actions detrimental to the legacy of the Sterling estate. I picked up my blue ballpoint pen. The metal felt heavy and cold in my fingers. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name at the bottom. With one stroke of blue ink, I reduced his multi-million-dollar inheritance to exactly $0. I slipped the document into a thick manila envelope. I sealed it tight. I sent it via certified mail straight to his Buckhead condo. He was left with nothing, no money, no company, just a server room full of fried hard drives. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The silence in the executive office was heavy. My mind drifted back to 1994. I was standing in a damp midtown garage. The air smelled like ozone and cheap delivery pizza. I could still see the blinking green lights of the very first Aegis server. I built that machine with my own 2 hands. I built this legacy with his father. We poured our blood into those motherboards. Pierce tried to burn it all down for a quick payout. He failed. I opened my eyes. The digital clock on the wall read 10:30 a.m. Aegis Biometrics was mine again. Marcus was already downstairs. He was settling into the Chief Information Security Officer's suite. The board was thoroughly terrified and completely compliant. The paper trail never lies. Arrogance is a highly predictable vulnerability. I walked over to the silver espresso machine in the corner of the office. The polished metal caught my reflection. I poured myself a cup of dark roast coffee. The steam warmed my face. I took a slow sip. It tasted perfect. I will never make coffee for a mediocre man ever again. I'm sharing this because I know someone out there is dealing with their own Julian or their own Pierce. Someone taking credit for your late nights and your genius. Drop a like if the story hit you. I really want to know who is listening to this. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it there? Drop a comment. I read every single one of them. If you want to hear more about how I protect my empire, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you turn on notifications. Hit that bell so you don't miss a thing. They say you should never underestimate the quiet people in the room. But more importantly, never insult the woman who knows where the servers are buried.